Oh, there we go. Science fiction, fantasy, futuristic, machine or creature. So that might be a science fiction machine, a fantasy machine, a futuristic machine, a science fiction creature, a fantasy creature, or a futuristic creature. So you've got lots of options here, and I'm going to show you some different artists' approaches. I've also got a few links here because several of these talk about the process. So Shiigeki Hayashi has this set of sort of futuristic robot warrior babies. You can read about it there at that link if you'd like to. Bobby Tso's machines are clearly meant to do something. It's a little unclear what they are necessarily meant to do. His work is also a combination of medium, so he has some wood and some kind of like rubbery material in here as well as the ceramic. Although you could do you could make machines that are mainly ceramic. We are going to be allowed to you will be allowed to use some mixed media, but the majority of the sculpture should be ceramic. Clayton Bailey was an artist working in the funk period, sort of weird, strange. So here are, it looks like skeletons that have been excavated by archaeologists, but they appear to be of cyclopses. So we get what feels like history, but of an alternate world in which we have fantasy creatures, cyclopses. Michael Grafton's work, and you can find a lot of his stuff online, Mitchell Grafton does these kind of steampunk pieces that still reflect oftentimes vases or jugs and pitchers and teapots and things like that. Often they're animals, but some of them are people and things like that. He does also do some mixed media stuff. Lots of texture, lots of stuff going on here. And they very much feel like machines or creatures or both in the case of this cat here in the bottom. Katharine Morling, not all of her work fits this prompt, this creative problem, but she's got a number of pieces that do, or you could imagine how you would make them fit. So we have a sort of winged bird warrior thing here, obviously from fantasy, from not the real world. This box is sort of feels in some ways like a machine. It looks like it's just a box with latches, but it reminds me or makes me think of ways that you might interpret this to be some sort of machine that was to do something. One note about the machines, they should look like they are machines, but they're sculptures of machines, so they don't actually have to work. It looks like Katharine Morling's pieces come out. They open up and stuff like that. It would be great if yours did that. They wouldn't have to. We couldn't tell how it's supposed to look like it works, you might have to explain, okay, it's supposed to look like you could turn this part on and this part could spin or whatever. I included this other picture of Katharine's work for two reasons. One is we have this kind of figure in the clouds, which suggests it's from fantasy. But the other is that these are separate pieces. So she's got these clouds and then also the figure on the horse, and it's really separate parts that work together in a sculpture. And so you might approach that as well. Now, Katharine Morling, I didn't think to include in the self-portrait or career goals sections, but she could fit there as well. This is sort of a bag with different tools that someone might use. You could imagine a container or a machine that sort of envelops or suggests your personality or your career goals. The telephone thing here, though it's an old-timey telephone, kind of like Mitchell Grafton's work, it suggests this fantasy world where you get lots of extra numbers as options or extra speaking places. It sort of feels like a machine that is both old and not entirely real. And with that, it would probably fit this particular creative problem. Ronit Baranga, which sounds like Runal Waslib to me, but this person's work is sort of containers, cups, plates, stuff like that are very traditional ceramics, but then this kind of creepy, I don't know if it's science fiction or fantasy or horror or what it is, but definitely these things seem to be coming to life in a natural way. And of course this would fit with this creature, science fiction creature made out of a bowl or something like that. Erika Sanada, not all of her work fits, but I've captured some pieces that do, where these animals, I'm not sure what these animals are, these dogs or whatever they are, seem to be turning into branches that seem to be developing from or into trees and plants. Or she often has these works where one animal is sort of attached or coming into or coming out of another animal. Her work can get real creepy, so if that's your thing, go check her out. If not, maybe move on. Her work can also be very emotional. You get a real sense of a mood in these pieces. Thinking back to the self-portrait example, they seem to suggest a feeling, an expression of an emotion in her animals. Switching gears entirely, Ron Free's work is often suggests fantasy or maybe even horror, but they also are functional containers, or mugs with handles, drinking vessels, storage for I don't know, what do you think they store in there? Something alcoholic, I'm sure. He was working in a tradition of face jugs, but very much in the science fiction or fantasy version of that. Johnson Tang's work, you can actually read about this work. I don't know if he does much else. I haven't seen his work a lot out there, except for this particular piece, but it's this dragon kind of wrapping around this vase, and so it suggests the history of Chinese vases, but then this dragon seems to be coming alive and squeezing the vase. You can read all about his process right here if you're interested. Beth Cavener, actually used to be Cavener-Stitchter, now I think it's Cavener, but I didn't change my slide. She makes work that is right on the borderline between realistic, I mean, they're very realistic creatures, but they're in fantasy, you know, the what's happening to them or how they're positioned is very much fantastical. They're anthropomorphized. They seem to be acting like people. In fact, this particular one, if you look at the entire figure, they are both male goats, which you can definitely tell, and I decided to keep it PG in the slideshow here. And this one, we have this kind of porcelain decorated snake around the bunny. We have the wolf vomiting this pink goo, and her work's really interesting, and you can see how it starts to fit in. I think if you showed something like this, you might need to help us understand why it's fantasy as opposed to a realistic figure. So help us see those parts that are changed from what a real animal looks like. Oh, and that's all I've got for this one. You might be influenced by some of these artists. You might have something in mind. You might also be influenced by stories and things like that, but I'm going to encourage you strongly not to try to base your work off of something from a movie where you know the character really well and you've seen it so many times that you have no flexibility in how you represent it. So try to think of a story or either something you make up or a story from a book or something where you haven't seen the imagery created by another artist, because this should not be a copy from another artist.